There we go. And then we're going to post the video to the YouTube channel after the fact. So if you want to rewatch, or if there's something that that you want to revisit or share with other neighbors, then you can do that from the video. So just a quick introduction to start. For those of you who don't know, I'm John-Paul Danko, your Ward 8 City Councillor. So really appreciate everyone joining us for this rental housing bylaw, or rental housing licensing information session. So with us from the city, we have Kelly Barnett, our Licensing and Bylaw Services Manager, and Kelly Beaton, Manager of Service Delivery. Give us a wave, Kelly. There you go. Thank you. And then we also have from the Ward 8 office, Nicola and Shane, who are joining us and are going to be taking some notes this evening. So Kelly and Kelly have a presentation for us, and following the presentation, we're going to open up the floor to a question and answer session from residents. So we just ask that during the presentation, if everybody could keep your microphones muted, and then when we go to the Q&A, you can either use the little raise hand button down at the bottom to indicate that you have a question, or just turn on your video and wave, or just enter your question in the chat, and then we'll get to them and hopefully get you some answers that you're looking for. So with that, I guess I'm going to turn it over to Kelly and Kelly, and you can go from here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Danko. And it's a pleasure to be here this evening. And we are going to share the screen and start our little PowerPoint presentation. And the other Kelly will be speaking on it. So I'm just going to mute myself and okay, Kelly, you're good to go.
Thanks so much, Kelly. I appreciate your help. First of all, I would really like to thank Councillor Danko for reaching out to us today and asking us to come to this meeting to discuss this very, very important pilot project that affects his ward as well as wards 1 and parts of 14. So thank you, Councillor Danko. Really appreciate the invite today. I will be going through a brief presentation, and the end that we will open it up for questions. This pilot project is unique to Hamilton. It's a 2-year pilot project for wards 1, 8, and parts of ward 14. The requirements are that all property owners of each rental unit and building or part thereof consisting of 4 or less self-contained dwelling units be licensed. Secondary units in detached homes and townhouses, if rented, will also require a license. For this license, various inspections need to happen, one being a fire inspection, the other being a property standards inspection, and that is done prior to issuing the rental license. This will help protect the health and safety of tenants because everyone deserves a safe place to live. I would like to stress that the enforcement strategy of this pilot project is to educate, educate, educate. Education is the key to the success of this program. We need to ensure that property owners, that tenants, that the community have all the information that they need to understand this very important pilot project. And officers are not taking a hard-nosed approach to this. Officers will do their inspections. If there's violations of a bylaw, they're going to negotiate a reasonable business plan to gain voluntary compliance for violations, working with tenants and owners. Enforcement is not meant to displace tenants, and that's very, very important to understand. And we have officers that are very, very skilled at making sure that they give appropriate timelines to property owners so that we achieve a very favorable outcome. The rationale for this pilot project actually started quite some time ago with the Rental Housing Subcommittee that met between the years of 2014 and 2018. And they expressed some concerns about illegal dwellings in the neighborhood. They were worried about absentee landlords who weren't monitoring their properties and or their tenants' behavior. And there was a high amount of property standards and yard maintenance complaint received by municipal law enforcement. As a result, there was a recommendation to move forward with this pilot project in wards 1, 8, and part of 14. That's the focus of the rental license pilot project. At the end of the pilot project, a very comprehensive evaluation will be done and a report will go forward, and it will be determined at that time if the pilot project will be made citywide. So this summer, council approved the following. They approved the bylaw, the rental housing units bylaw. That's actually a Schedule 31 under our licensing bylaw. They approved a transition plan and timelines. And this was a very complicated pilot project to put together because it crossed over to several other city departments as well. And there's a lot of planning to do. So it takes a lot of time to put this type of project together. They also approved that the license fees that are going to be charged are full cost recovery based on the assumption that 2,000 rental units will be licensed annually. This list was developed some time ago, but there will be other means of identifying units that possibly need a rental license in place. The transition plan. Very interesting in doing this transition plan. We had to think of all the key factors to roll this out, and it's really actually being rolled out over about a 7-month timeline. The biggest thing, as I said earlier, was the education development, and it has to be very, very extensive. So we're talking about a web page development. We're talking about brochures, door knockers, displays, presentations, and this is being done by Kelly and I in conjunction with our senior communications officer, who has been a really great help because we understand the importance to ensure that the landlords, tenants, community have all the information, that it's clear and they can understand it. So that's a big undertaking. We started that in November, and we're slowly moving forward, trying to develop all the different kinds of materials that we will need. The next part was staff recruitment and training. We have 4 FTEs that are being hired within the fire department, 3 FTEs in licensing and bylaw services. 1 will be an administrator. The other ones will be officers, municipal law enforcement officers, to do the inspections. And then we have 3 in our building department, and they will be responsible for doing the zoning verifications. Now, this is going to be hired over a period of time. The training for these positions, especially for the fire department and the licensing officers, is very extensive. They need to have a lot of information under their belt, so it is going to take time, but we're moving forward with that. We are going to start to implement education very early. We want to make sure that the property owners have all the information they need to make sure they're ready to go forward when the license application process opens up. So that will start in January. Again, first with our webpage. The webpage is really, really important. It's going to have an awful lot of information on it. And then we also had a lot of behind the scenes work in licensing and bylaw services. Our database has to be updated. We need to have online portals created so that if people want to register through a web page, they can do that. So it's quite extensive. All kinds of information about the inspections we're going to do. There's going to be checklists for property owners, all kinds of important information. Starting in February, property owners are going to be able to start to submit their zoning verification. And that's very, very important. That's one of the first steps they need to do. They need to submit that zoning verification when they apply for the license. And that takes a little bit of time, and that's done right now by our zoning officers in building. So we figured if we started early enough in February, that'll give people time to get that done. We don't want everybody rushing at once to go get zoning verifications. What we're going to do is in April, we are going to start to accept the licensing applications, but it's going to be a very phased in approach. We're not exactly sure what that phased in approach looks like yet. We're looking at that now and we're doing lots of planning, but it could be something like all properties in a certain alphabet will register within these timelines. We just recently had the new manager of licensing begin with us about 3 weeks ago now. So we were waiting for him to start. His name's Dan Smith, great guy. We were waiting for him to start with us so that he could help us make some of the key decisions that needed to be made. When people submit their licensing verification, they can do it online, or they're going to be able to come to our licensing counter, which is going to be 330 Wentworth. And again, that's going to start in September with a phased in approach. So not only do property owners need their zoning verification, they also need an electrical safety inspection. And that information will be on the website as well. It's not something that the city arranges. We will have information linking you to the Electrical Safety Association standards, and you'll be able to go on that website. And when I checked it out, they had a link where I could go on and I could pick the licensed electricians close to my home that could do these types of inspections. So that's a very, very important step in the process. And then once the fire licensing applications or the zoning and electrical inspections are done, the application can be submitted, and that initiates a fire inspection and a license inspection for property standards. And all steps must be in compliance prior to the rental license being issued. So if there was any orders issued, the property owner would have the time needed to fix those violations and come in compliance with the bylaw. This screen shows the licensing fees based on a full cost recovery, and the fees apply to each rental unit of 4 or less self-contained units in a building. And again, as I said earlier, secondary units in detached homes or townhouses, if they're rented out, they will require their own license as well. So you can see the fees for the first and second year of licensing are the same. And the building has a one-time for the purpose of this pilot project for a zoning verification to be done. Fire is the same as licensing, and they need their inspections done annually. In calling around to find out what the ESA charges for their inspections or electricians charge, it varies. It depends sometimes on the size, the square footage of the house, how many units, but it's estimated to run between $350 and $500 for that inspection. The licensing requirements, and this is information right in the bylaw. We need certain information. We need the property owner's information and proof that they own the building. We need a site sketch of the units and floor plans measured out for the size of the rooms. We need proof of insurance. I believe it's a $2 million insurance. And we will need a self-certification checklist. So this is going to go to the property owner. They're going to be able to go through it. They're going to be able to check off, make sure that they understand what is needed. And then there's going to be a property checklist that is going to be used by the investigating officers so that they go and they can explain to the property owners exactly what they're inspecting. And then the zoning verification and the electrical safety code certificate, which is submitted with the license, and that initiates the fire inspection and the property standards inspection as well. This will take some time. We expect that even though a license is submitted, say in April, it might take a month, it might take 2 months to go through that entire process of ensuring everything is been received and that these inspections are done and they're in compliance. So as I said, the education and communications it's going to be absolutely key. And right now we're working on all the different medias that we have to go through to get this information out. So there's going to be social media. We're doing the brochures and the door knockers. We need to explain the process for complaints, for reporting possible illegal units. We need the website so that all the relevant information is there to make this easy for everybody, including property owners and tenants. There's going to be the requirements and FAQs on that page. We also, we're working really closely with the ward councillors. They have community meetings. We will be able to attend community meetings. We'll be able to supply content for community newsletters, attend stakeholders, including school and neighborhoods associations. We often do that with education for bylaw, for the various bylaws. We worked very closely in the past with our schools in the area, and we will continue to do so. And something very special for wards 1, 8, and parts of 14 is the MLE student officers assigned to those wards. Those student officers are with us on a year basis. They go out into the communities, into those wards, and they become ambassadors. They reach out to the neighborhood, to property owners, to tenants, and they provide education. They also are responsible for enforcing certain bylaws, and there's a big presence, and they enforce the yard maintenance bylaw. So that's things like your long grass and weed, your garbage and debris, and some waste management. And they also enforce snow on sidewalk, removing snow off sidewalks. So that's going to continue. So we see them as being a great link to the community and a really good link with the schools in the areas to build relationships with the tenants that are attending the school. So those students are going to be very, very important in this whole initiative. So that's the end of my brief presentation, and we will certainly be up for questions. I just want to say that there could be some questions tonight that might be difficult for us to answer because we're licensing and bylaw services. I was unable to get somebody here for zoning verifications, but we are able to take any questions that we can't answer. We will take them back to staff, and hoping through the counselor's office, we will be able to get the answers to those very important questions.
Thanks so much, Kelly. We do have a number of really good questions in the chat, so I'm going to go through those first, and then we'll open up the floor to any additional questions from residents. So these are questions that came to mind as you were speaking, and we'll just go through them one by one. So the first one is, how will we know which houses are rental units?
Oh, that's an excellent question, Councillor. We have a list of approximately 2,000 rental units already. That's going to be a very important list for us to work from, but it's not going to be our only means of identifying information. We are going to reach out to the school systems if they have any leads on off-campus housing. We are going to have a dedicated email address so that tenants, property owners, the community can ask questions. And when we get leads, we're going to investigate, and the officers use various tools to determine whether or not they believe it's a rental unit. And one of those tools is going to be reaching out to property owners and talking to them about what's going on inside their house, their units, and then seeking compliance. If they need a license, we will help them facilitate that process.
Thank you. And I will also be working closely, specifically in Ward 8 with Mohawk College and
Oh,
the
yes.
Mohawk Students Association, which will be part and parcel of how we identify which units are rentals.
Absolutely, Councillor.
Thank you. From Shivali, is there a website we can look at for criteria?
There is, it's just not up and running right now. We have submitted the format to the website to our senior communications officer, Michelle Chance, to make sure that she has her expertise, eyes on this document to make sure we're doing it right. That's why we've put teams together to work on the issues to make sure we come up with the best product possible to be successful. So she's reviewing all of that information right now, and there is a lot of information, and we hope to have that up and running on the website in early January.
Great, thank you. Also from Shivali, a question of, will it mean that all basements will have to be renovated to legal basements? And the qualifier is that it can be difficult to renovate basements in older houses.
That's a wide question. So what would happen is if somebody wanted to put a unit in their basement, they would need to go through the committee of adjustment and have a minor variance done and a zoning verification, and then they could go forward with that. For the purpose of the licensing, that those dwellings that are being, those basements that are being converted have to comply with the building code, and they're going to have to comply with the fire codes plus any property standards. So it's going to be quite a comprehensive process indeed. But again, our goal is to work with property owners to help them through this process and seek compliance, and the times that they need to fix any issues that need to be fixed. The only time that we might take a more aggressive approach is if we find a huge health and safety, a fire violation where we can't afford the time and it needs to be corrected in a faster manner. That will need to happen. But again, those are communications with property owners and the inspecting officers.
Thank you. And I'll just add to that, that prior to rental licensing, the city put in the secondary suites bylaw, which streamlines a lot of that approvals process for secondary suites traditionally in the, in the basement. So the process for legalizing basement units should be a lot more straightforward than it had been in the past, but it's still going to be required that they be legalized and brought into conformity.
That's great, right, Councillor. And before the meeting, I went on to the zoning bylaw, and they have a lot of great information on secondary units and the process and how property owners go about doing that, which operates separately from licensing and bylaw services. But for the purpose of this pilot project, we are working very closely together.
Thank you. Next question from Pat. Will real estate agents have to identify which homes are rental units when they go up for sale?
Pat, that's a very good question, and one that we are still in the planning stages. We need to get some more clarification for our legal staff on how that's going to roll out. And we need, in all fairness, we need to have the conversations with them and have their support. Once you know about the law, we really do fully expect people need to stay above board. I know when my friends bought a house, their real estate told them that the apartment in the basement was an in-law suite and only meant for those purposes and couldn't be rented out. So, we have agents out there who really want to do the right thing, and hopefully that everybody will understand that you shouldn't be in a bylaw violation. You should be within the law.
Thank you. And I see that as a real selling feature for real estate agents to be able to put in the listing that it does have a licensed unit in the home that's for sale, because then the buyer knows that it's legal, it's licensed, and everything is according to code.
And that's a great point, Counselor, because if you're a parent and you have a child going off or a young adult going off to school, I think you would like to have the resources available to go online and see, hey, this is a licensed unit and I feel a lot more comfortable with my child renting out that property.
Thank you. From Gail, will electrical and fire inspections from 2016 building permits suffice it for rental licensing?
No, we have to stay very, very current because things can change within that time period. So we've checked with the fire chief and they need their inspections to be done yearly. The ESA inspection, for the purpose of this pilot project, we are only asking for one for the 2 years. And it could go as far as, if it's turned into a permanent program, a little bit longer.
Thank you. From Pat, the question is, can we enforce landlords responsible for outdoor property maintenance, including snow clearance, and will enforcement be proactive or reactive?
We absolutely can, and we will. It will be a lot of the enforcement it will be both proactive and reactive, but it will be done a lot by our student municipal law enforcement officers. We have 4 of them. And I know when we have a snowstorm, though, we don't leave it all up to them. We put all hands on deck. Everybody's out there because that's a priority bylaw for us, because we certainly don't want people slipping and falling. So snow removal off sidewalks is really big for us. But these students have done a good job in the past. They're able to issue orders as they're out in the field, and then they follow up with the property owners. But yes, we have high expectations of the outside of properties being maintained as well. And when these students are out there doing yard maintenance or snow, they're also taking a very quick look at the external of the property. They're not going inside the property. They're not doing a property standards inspection, but if they see something that they think doesn't look quite right, maybe there's no handrail on the stairs, maybe there's shingles coming off the roof or broken windows or whatever, they will report that back, and we will send out a senior officer to do the investigation of that property.
Thank you. And just a further comment question from me on that is, my understanding is if there is a property that has a history of property standards issues, so whether that's, you know, trash collection or furniture on the front yard or grass or snow clearing, whatever it is, if there's an established history of problems that can impact the ability for that property to be licensed as a rental.
That's correct. And in addition to that, though, if there is repeated violations of the same bylaw, we will take progressive enforcement measures, which means that fee for services can be issued to the property owner for non-compliance and for inspection rechecks. In addition, there are tickets that can also be issued for repeated violations within a certain period of time. The time it gets really, really tricky is when we're dealing with snow, because if you have a snowfall and an officer comes by and gives somebody an order and goes and rechecks it the next day, if it snowed within that time frame, we have to start over again, because we have no way of knowing if that property owner complied with the order from the first time. So I often get complaints. I constantly call into this about this property, but you haven't done anything about it. We have, we can only act in accordance with the bylaw. We need to give people time. We need, if it re-snows, and last year, I think we had to restart over a few times, and it happens.
Thank you. And hopefully with the new snow clearing bylaw next winter on the priority 1 and 2 transit routes, we'll see some improvement on those snow clearing issues. Question from Austin. Will all houses be charged the same fee basis, i.e. can a duplex, boarding house, rooming house, how does the fee structure apply?
The fee structure applies to each rental unit in the building. So if you have a duplex with an apartment upstairs and an apartment downstairs, you're paying for 2 licenses, one for each, and inspections are needed in each unit.
Thank you. Question from Pat. Will we be monitoring rental websites?
We have lots of tools in our toolbox, Pat. Our officers are really great at doing their investigations. And I can assure you that we have eyes watching every type of means that we can to ensure people are doing the right thing and complying with the bylaw.
Thank you. Question from Austin. Are we expecting already zoned properties to be rezoned?
Well, I think that it depends on if they're changing the use of their building. So that's why we need the zoning verification done for day one, because something might have been zoned differently 3 years ago and the owner wants to change the use of the building. So we need something very, very current.
Thank you. Question from Jordan. Will existing secondary dwellings that require retrofitting be held to the same standard as new builds? And then a follow-up comment is, this could become very expensive for property owners and push owners to sell or pull the rentals from the market.
Yes, they will need to be the same as new builds. What they have to is not that they're the same as new builds, it's that they have to comply with the building code, and they have to comply with fire codes and property standards. So those are the things that people are looking at when they go into rental units. And we do understand that there can be costs associated with making sure that the unit is in compliance with the bylaw, but there are reasons for that. We have the health and safety of tenants. And, but again, we're willing to work with property owners to ensure they have the time to make that all happen.
Thank you. And I'll just add to that, that all units that are currently rented should already meet all of the standards that are being as part of licensing. So there should be no units that are on the market right now that are being rented out that don't already comply. However, we do know that that's, you know, there are units that will have to have renovations made and changes made. And, you know, we want to work with property owners to make sure that we're not displacing anyone while that happens. But the bottom line is that that is ultimately the responsibility of the property owner to make sure that they are providing safe accommodations that meet all of those requirements.
Well said, Councillor.
Question from Austin. Realizing this is the first time the city is doing a pilot that downloads a fee on only a subset of the city, is this something that will survive the Ontario Land Tribunal appeal?
This is why we're doing a pilot project. And once the pilot project is completed, evaluated, and the report goes forward, it would be up to council to determine if they want to make that program citywide and permanent.
And I'll add to that, that this came up during the initial discussions when this was passed by council. And it's my understanding that there have been Ontario Land Tribunal appeals of similar programs in other municipalities, and they have not been successful.
Correct.
Question from Sean. What will the process be for those that remain out of compliance for extended periods?
Well, we're really hoping that with the skills of our officers that are doing the investigations, that they will build relationships with the property owner. But the bottom line comes that, you know, we do need compliance of the bylaws, and the officers have tools that they can use to bring a property into compliance. And that one of the tools is issuing orders for whatever the bylaw violation is.
And then thank you, there's a follow-up question about resources, you know, in particular that concern that this might be under-resourced, and we already have problems with snow clearing and enforcement.
Well, I mean, we have new staff coming on board, and we have the team of officers for specific 1, 8, and parts of 14. So they're out there. I think they're doing a good job, and I think it's going to depend a little bit on Mother Nature. But as I said, if we get a snowstorm, we don't rely on just the student officers in those wards. We also have ward officers, and we will redeploy staff to get out there within 24 hours of a snow event. So they do both reactive and they do proactive investigations.
Thank you. And just specific to the rental licensing program, the fees are set at a cost recovery basis. And there's a number of new staff that are being onboarded specifically to manage and enforce this program. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly how many, but it was quite a few. 10 new staff.
Yeah, there's 10, 4 in fire, 3 in building, and 3 in licensing and bylaw services.
So it's really important, you know, for implementation that we do have the appropriate staff in place to make this successful. And we recognize that we do need the resources required to do that.
And that's why the training is so in depth, is to make sure that all the officers are up to speed on what is required.
Thank you. Question from Emily: how will licensing work for student homes that usually are rented per room?
That's an excellent question, Emily, and one I thought about. So it's my understanding that that you're allowed to rent out 3 rooms in a home to well, it doesn't have to necessarily be students, but they have to be living as a family. That means that they have to have shared kitchens, they have to have shared bathrooms, common rooms. So they're basically living as a family unit.
Thank you. So let's say we can't differentiate between who chooses to live together. So whether they're students or a family or extended family, legally, we are not able to change how we regulate those properties. So if a student house is differentiated between an upstairs unit and a downstairs unit, then those would be 2 units. And the way that we would have a little bit more control than we do right now, Emily, is through the building code. So there's certain room sizes, habitable space requirements, and things like that, which would be enforced as part of licensing, so that you wouldn't be able to have some of the dangerous accommodations that we have right now with people that are, you know, too many people in too small a space. We'll just put it that way. Question from Pat. There's a house in their neighborhood for sale with 7 bedrooms and no living room and no dining room, and repeatedly has garbage and grass complaints. So I guess the question would be, how would that be impacted by the licensing program?
Well, first of all, if you have any property that you believe is in violation of one of the bylaws, so snow, long grass and weeds, garbage and debris, property standards, you can make a complaint to municipal law enforcement, and there's several ways to do that. It's on our website on how to make a complaint, but you can email mle@hamilton.ca. You can call it into 546-2782. And there's an online complaint form that you can fill out, and that we will receive, and we will assign those to the officer for investigation. And even if you think that there is an illegal unit right now, you can still report that unit by the means I've just explained. And even though we're not ready up and running, an officer could still go and investigate that unit.
Thank you. And for the situation where there's a rental unit with no living room, no dining room, no common space, that wouldn't meet building code. So it would not be able to be licensed with that configuration. They would have to bring that into compliance and provide kitchen space and common areas and that kind of thing. Question from Austin: if someone has a boarding house with 6 units, they will be paying $671 per unit. So I think the question is, how will houses that have multiple units be handled? And
this one, for the purpose of the licensing bylaw, this is for 4 units and less. So it wouldn't apply to a property or a building that has 6 units in it.
I think there might be a little confusion there of specifically what is a boarding house. If it was a legal boarding house with more than 4 units, as you said, Kelly, it wouldn't be covered under this program. But I think a lot of times when people say a boarding house, they mean a house that's been divided into several units illegally, which would then have to be brought into compliance.
Absolutely, like a lodging home, and an officer would inspect that as well.
Thank you. Question from Austin. These fees are going to end up being downloaded to the tenants, and they can't imagine landlords taking on $671 per unit. So on the downloading to tenants issue.
Yeah, that is a bit of a challenge, and but I think when council passed this bylaw, the intent was to ensure that tenants have very safe housing. And we have investigated rental properties that have lots of bylaw violations, and we have had fires in the past, and people have died as a result of those fires. So the means of this pilot project is everybody deserves a safe place to live, and to do that, you need to comply with the City of Hamilton bylaws.
Thank you. And just looking at some of the costing from that, you know, a couple things come to mind. First of all, that the property values have just gone up astronomically in the last few years. So property owners are still making a very healthy return on their investments. And also a number of these houses that, even though it's per unit, it doesn't define of how many people are living as a family in that unit. So a typical, again, we're talking about a student housing situation. Say you have 8 students living in a unit, the cost per person comes out to be like $10 a month. So I don't see that being, you know, something that will have a huge impact on a lot of the rental housing that is in Ward 8 in particular. But it's definitely something that we want to see as part of this pilot, making sure that we're not displacing anybody, and how the fee structure impacts the availability of rental housing. Question from Shivali. I'm a resident in my own home. Do I need a license?
Not unless you're renting part of your home out, you do not need a license.
So in the situation where you have the homeowner living in, say, the upstairs, just to use an example, and they're renting out the basement, in that situation, they would need a license for that unit in the basement.
That's right.
But not for their primary residence.
No.
Yeah. Thank you. Question again from Austin. If there ends up being less than 2,000 licensed unit, will the fees go up, or will the staff complement go down?
We won't know until we evaluate the program at the end of the 2 years, but we do have a existing list of already 2,000 rental units, and we suspect there could be quite a few more. That list will need to be updated. Plus, there's, as the councillor said, we will be working with the schools. They have off-campus housing. We haven't been able to approach them yet, but we will be approaching them. We will be looking for all types of avenues for rental properties, and make sure that they are complying with the bylaw and providing safe housing.
Thank you. And as I said before, it's the fees were set on a cost recovery basis. So there's no taxpayer subsidy of this program is covered by the fees charged to property owners. And it's really important, again, that we do work with the post-secondary institutions, because what we've seen in some of the other municipalities is that it becomes, again, something that parents and students that are going to be renting, you know, actively look for and want to know that they're renting safe accommodation that is officially licensed by the city. Question from Pat. Can a landlord deny entrance for inspection?
Yes, they can. We need to be We need to be invited into a unit to do the inspection for any bylaw violation inside a unit. However, if we have the evidence, the officer can have tools to gain entry into that building, or fire can as well. If we have any types of concerns, usually our officers, in talking with property owners, because they will be reaching out to them, discussing the pilot project, the reason behind it, we're very hopeful that we won't have any difficulties getting into rental units. And I did talk to the City of London, and they were quite optimistic. They didn't have a lot of problems gaining entry into places.
Thank you. And just talking about enforcement as well, speaking with the fire chief and the Electrical Safety Authority, is they have other methods of enforcement that are, in some ways quite a bit beyond what what city bylaw has. Question from Emily. If a student home, this clarification question, if a student rental has many bedrooms and its square foot, if it has many bedrooms and will be told to take away bedrooms, is that a possibility? So again, we're not differentiating by it's a student house or a family or whomever happens to be there, but if it is a house that has many bedrooms and not enough living space that doesn't meet building code, then yeah, they will be expected to come into compliance with building code. Anything to add, Kelly?
No, that's perfectly said, Councillor.
Thank you. Another question from Emily. Can the tenant invite bylaw in, or does the property only have the ability to stop bylaw from
We
accessing?
welcome tenants inviting bylaw officers into rental units. If a tenant has a property standards complaint, they don't have to wait for this rental unit pilot program. The first step, if a tenant has a problem, is to notify their property owner of the problem, of what they think is a violation. They put it in writing, they give it to the property owner, and they give them a reasonable amount of time to fix the issue. If they don't fix the issue, and they should keep a copy of the letter, they can make a property standards complaint, and an officer will go out to do an investigation. They need to be invited into the unit, and if they find a violation, they will issue, or they will reach out to the property owner, or if it's necessary, will issue an order of compliance to have that problem fixed. But we don't want people, if they have concerns in their units, to wait for this pilot project to get up and running. You have that, you're able to make a complaint right now about your rental unit.
Thank you, Kelly. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that the main driver for rental licensing in the first place was that safety of tenants and making sure that the people actually living in these units have a safe and appropriate living space. So it is really important for us to reach out and include tenants as much as possible in as we work through the program. A comment from Austin about the cost of the program and downloading expenses from the fees onto tenants, in particular families. So when it's not a situation with a number of people sharing the rent, if it's just one family or two families, the cost being downloaded to their rent is fairly significant. So again, I guess the question would be, how are we monitoring that, and how do we expect that might impact tenants?
That's a very difficult question for us to answer this early when we haven't even rolled it out, and whether or not we can even capture that type of data once we get going. But rental units are a source of income for property owners. You know, it is a business for them, and not all property owners will download these costs. It's a 2-year pilot project. The fees aren't exorbitant. It's most important to have a safe unit for your tenants to live in.
Thank you. And again, I'll just reiterate that property values have increased very, very significantly in recent years, and even with the cost of the licensing fees, which I still see as a fairly minimal expense from a business perspective, property owners have seen a very good return on their investments. But that's certainly something that we want to monitor as part of the pilot, again, to make sure that we're not displacing people that are struggling with rents, and we know that's an issue in the city of Hamilton right now. Question from Emily. Would this project help landlords have to file their taxes for their income gained?
Well, Emily, that is one question that I really never considered. I would ask that possibly Nicola make note of this question, and we can certainly try to look into it. I imagine if it's operating as a business and they're making an income from their business, that it would be declared with their taxes. But I'm not an expert in that field, but I can certainly ask some questions.
Thank you. We did have some discussion about this during the with staff when we were bringing this forward. And there's a couple questions about, reporting the income from rental properties as business expenses, which again should already be done now if you're legal. And also the question of insurance requirements, if insurance companies will be checking to see if they're insuring legal licensed properties as well. And I think those are a couple of the questions that we're still, as Kelly said, we're still looking into as we work towards implementation. Question from Jordan. How much discretion would fire and building inspectors have when it comes to enforcing properties that meet most of the standards, but might fall short in one or two areas? And then there's an example of many homes have lower ceilings in the basement, and the cost to raise the beams or bulkheads would be substantial, and in likely cases not possible.
Officers have discretion as far as working with property owners, ensuring that they have the appropriate timelines to make the repairs, but they cannot go against the Building Code Act, and they cannot go against the fire code. So whatever is in, and I'm not an expert in either one of those, but whatever the code says, rental units have to be in compliance, and there's reasons that they need to be in compliance with those codes.
So for something like the fire code, there's no discretion. The fire inspector will enforce the fire code as it is written. For the building code, property owners would have the option, if there's something minor, like the example used of ceiling heights, to go to the community adjustment and get a variance for those adjustments. And with the secondary suites bylaw, again, we've tried to streamline that process in order to make sure that we're not restricting the ability of properties to accommodate secondary suites. But again, it will be the responsibility of the property owner to either be in compliance or to get the variances necessary to be in compliance. Another question. Sorry, everybody's just doing a great job at putting their questions in the chat. So I'm just going to continue with this. It's almost 8 o'clock, so we're almost ready to wrap up, but there's a couple more questions in the chat. So please just enter your question there if we haven't got to it yet. And then again, I'll just do kind of like a round at the end and see if there's anything that we might have missed. So last question I see in the chat, is there a plan to deal with displaced residents?
Not that I'm aware of. That isn't the role of municipal law enforcement. Our role is to enforce the bylaw and to implement this rental licensing pilot project. We really don't know how many people, if any, at this time are going to be displaced. And of course, our goal is to not have that happen, to try to get the property owners to come in compliance and not displace people. That's the last thing we want to do. So we'll be working very hard with property owners, giving the time that they need to come in compliance and facilitating whatever we need to do to help them.
Thank you. And as of right now, as I said, there shouldn't be a single property that's currently rented that isn't in compliance. Now, we know that that's not the case, and the goal of this pilot, again, is to assess how this impacts tenants and to avoid displacing anybody from the place where they're living. One more question from the chat from Shivali. If a house is listed under, oh, sorry, how do we know if a house is already included with the 2,000 houses that have been identified as licensed rental properties?
A good question. At this time, you wouldn't know, but when we get up and running and we have our address dedicated for rental license, you can always call it in. That address will be cross-referenced for what we already have in our database, and we would know to either add it or it's still going to be on the list for follow-up with property owners.
Thank you, Kelly. So the time's 8 o'clock, so we're just past our scheduled time for the meeting, but I'll just quickly go through everybody who's logged in right now. If there's anything else that we haven't answered or a question that you still are wondering about, please just add it to the chat or raise your hand or start your video or unmute yourself and ask your question. If not, I'm not seeing anybody. So if that's the case, we're going to wrap up. If something comes to mind and you're not sure, and you want to ask either the Ward 8 office, we can get you the information that you need. So please just send us an email. It's ward8@hamilton.ca, or our website is ward8hamilton.ca. So really appreciate everybody from joining us tonight. And as I said, we're going to be posting the recording of this meeting on the Ward 8 YouTube channel so that you can share it with your neighbors and other people in the community if you think it might be valuable information for them as well. So thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Kelly and Kelly, really appreciate it. And take care and stay safe. Good night.